The dog came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and Soren Ashby was the only one who didn't walk away. That was the part nobody wanted to talk about afterward. Not the firing. Not the Navy. Not even what happened in Administrator Pendleton's office 3 days later when 4 men in uniform walked through the front doors of Claremont Regional Medical Center and the whole building went quiet like someone had cut the power. The part nobody wanted to talk about was the 11 seconds. Soren counted them later, replaying it in her head the way you replay a car accident. The 11 seconds when everyone else on that night shift took one step back and looked at the floor. She didn't. Soren was 31 years old and had been a registered nurse for 6 years, the last 3 of them in the emergency department at Claremont Regional, a mid-size hospital in coastal Virginia that smelled like salt air and floor wax and was understaffed on every shift except the ones where the administrators decided to do a walkthrough. She had 12-hour legs, the kind that stopped registering pain somewhere around hour 8 and just went numb, and she had the particular kind of calm that comes not from being unafraid, but from having made peace with the fact that fear doesn't actually help anybody. She was charting at the nurse's station when the automatic doors blew open. The man who came through them was in military uniform, Marine Corps. She registered that first, the eagle and globe and anchor on his collar. And he was moving fast, one arm pressed to his side, the other crappled around a German shepherd that outweighed most of the children Soren had treated that month. The dog's left rear leg was wrapped in a field dressing that had soaked through completely. The man's face was the specific color of someone running on adrenaline and very little else, and when he got close enough that she could see his eyes, she understood that the adrenaline was almost gone. "She's losing blood," he said. His voice was flat and controlled in the way military voices got when the person behind them was holding themselves together by force of will. ID fragment, 2 hours ago. Field team did what they could. Soren was already around the desk. Behind her, she heard Dr. Novak, the attending on duty, a cautious man who wore his caution like a second white coat, say carefully, "This is a human medical facility." "I know what it is," the Marine said. Soren crouched down beside the dog. The shepherd was conscious, ears flat, watching her with amber eyes that were too alert for the amount of blood she'd lost. Military working dog, K9 unit. The vest was still on, tactical olive drab, with a patch on the side that Soren would later learn indicated she was assigned to a Marine Special Operations unit currently staged out of a base 40 minutes up the coast. The dog's name, the Marine told her, was Bex. Soren put her hand on Bex's side and felt the shallow, rapid movement of her breathing, and made a decision that she understood, even in the moment, might cost her something. "Get me a gurney," she said. Nobody moved. She stood up and looked at the 3 people behind the nurse's station, a tech named Dominic, a second-year resident named Patel, and Novak himself, who had his arms crossed and was already composing the expression he would wear when he said no. "Dominic," Soren said. "Gurney, now." Dominic went for the gurney. He was 23 and had not yet learned how to refuse someone who sounded like they already knew the answer. Novak said, "Ashby, this is not. She's a working military asset and she's in hemorrhagic shock," Soren said. She was pulling on gloves as she said it. "The nearest veterinary surgical facility is 40 minutes away. She won't make 40 minutes." She looked at Novak directly. "So we're either going to help her or we're going to watch her die in our parking lot, and I'm not doing the second one." Novak looked at the Marine. The Marine looked at Novak and said nothing, and somehow that was worse than anything he could have said. "This will need to go through administration," Novak said. "Call them," Soren said. "I'll be in trauma too." She didn't wait to see if he did. What happened in Trauma 2 over the next 90 minutes was, in the purely technical sense, outside Soren Ashby's scope of practice. She knew that. She had known it from the moment she said, "Get me a gurney." The hospital's protocol was explicit. The facility treated humans. The equipment, the medications, the staff, all of it existed for human patients, and using any of it on a non-human animal without administrative approval was a violation that could result in anything from a formal reprimand to termination to a review by the state nursing board. She knew all of that. She also knew canine anatomy well enough to recognize the bleed was arterial, and the field dressing had been applied correctly but was insufficient, and that Bex's blood pressure was dropping in a way that did not leave room for a 45-minute phone chain. The Marine, his name was Sergeant Kovacs, she learned later, though she called him Sergeant for the first hour, and he called her ma'am until she told him to stop. Stayed in the room the entire time. He stood against the wall, out of her way, and he did not make a sound except once near the beginning, when Bex turned her head toward his voice and her tail moved, just slightly, against the gurney. Soren heard him exhale. She kept her eyes on her work. Patel came in eventually, gloved and quiet, and handed Soren instruments without being asked and did not speak except to answer direct questions. He was not supposed to be there either. Later, when everything else happened, Soren made sure everyone knew that Patel had come in on his own and that she had not asked him to. She was not sure it made a difference, but she made sure they knew. 40 minutes in, Bex's vitals stabilized. Soren didn't relax. She knew better than to relax at the first sign of stability, but she let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since the doors opened. She heard Kovacs shift his weight against the wall. "She's going to need monitoring," Soren said, "and she needs a veterinarian. Can your unit get someone here?" "Already making the call," Kovacs said, and she could hear in his voice that the adrenaline had finally let go of him and that he was very, very tired. The veterinarian arrived 53 minutes later, a compact woman named Dr. Shields from the base's animal care unit, who took one look at Soren's work and said, "Whoever did this just saved her life." She said it to the room in general, but she was looking at Soren when she said it. Soren was washing her hands at the scrub sink and did not reply. Behind her, she heard the door open, and then she heard a voice she recognized, and she understood that the other thing was starting. Lorraine Maddox had been the chief administrative officer at Claremont Regional for 9 years. She was 61 years old, dressed at midnight in a blazer over a silk blouse, and she had the particular quality of administrative authority that came from never having been told no often enough. She was not a cruel woman, Soren had always thought. She was something more specific than cruel. She was someone who had decided, a long time ago, that rules were what made her right, and so she had never had to think very hard about whether she actually was. She stood in the doorway of Trauma 2 and looked at the gurney and the dog on it and the instruments on the tray and said, "Ashby." Just the name. Nothing else. Soren turned around. "My office," Maddox said. "Now." Soren looked at Bex, who was breathing steadily now, monitored and sedated and alive. She looked at Kovacs, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She looked at Dr. Shields, who had her hand very gently on Bex's shoulder. She took off her gloves and followed Maddox out. The walk to the administrative wing was the kind of walk that everyone on the floor watched without appearing to. Soren was aware of it, the eyes from the nurse's station, from the hallway, from behind the glass of the supply room, and she kept her back straight and her face quiet. She had nothing to be ashamed of, and she knew it, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was not afraid. Maddox's office was institutional and large, with the specific decor of someone who had spent 25 years in hospital administration, framed mission statements, a plaque from a regional healthcare association, a photograph from a ribbon cutting. Maddox sat behind her desk and did not invite Soren to sit. "You treated an animal," Maddox said, "in this facility, using this facility's equipment and medications. Without authorization, I stabilized a critical patient to prevent imminent death," Soren said. "The patient was a military working dog assigned to an active unit. The nearest veterinary surgical facility was—" "I'm aware of what you're going to say," Maddox said. "I'm telling you what you did. You violated protocol. You used controlled medications outside approved indication. You performed a procedure outside your scope of practice. You exposed this facility to significant liability. She would have died." Maddox looked at her. "That is not a defense." Soren held her gaze. "I know. You know," Maddox repeated, and there was something in her voice, not quite contempt, but something adjacent to it, something that had decided Soren was naive and found that contemptible. "Do you also know that this unit has been in contact with your supervisor twice in the past year regarding your—" She paused, selecting the word independent decision-making. Soren said nothing. "You are a skilled nurse," Maddox said, and she said it the way someone said it before a but this facility cannot function if individual staff members decide which rules apply to them based on their own judgment. That is not how institutions work." "No," Soren said. "It's not." Maddox opened a folder on her desk. Soren recognized the HR letterhead from across the room, the particular shade of cream paper they used for formal documentation. Effective immediately, Maddox said, your employment at Claremont Regional Medical Center is terminated. You will surrender your badge at the front desk. You will be escorted from the building. She looked up. Your personal items from your locker will be collected and brought to you in the lobby. You will not have additional access to the clinical areas. Soren stood very still. She had expected this. She had known, somewhere in Trauma 2, that this was the ending waiting for her. She had made the calculation and come up with the same answer every time. She would do it again. She would do it right now. Again without hesitation. If Bex came through those doors again, and the clock said 40 minutes to the nearest vet, and the blood pressure said not enough time, she would do it again. That didn't mean it didn't hurt. I understand, she said. She meant it. She understood exactly what Maddox was doing and why, and she understood that Maddox was not wrong about the rules, and she understood that understanding that didn't make it right. She stood in the office of a woman who had decided that the rules were the point. And she was someone who had decided, also a long time ago, that the rules were supposed to serve something larger than themselves, and those two people could not exist in the same institution. She'd probably known that for longer than she wanted to admit. A security guard named Harold, she knew Harold, had known him for 3 years, had brought him coffee on night shifts, walked her to the front lobby without meeting her eyes. She understood. She didn't hold it against him. She stood in the lobby of the hospital where she had worked for 3 years and waited for a plastic bag containing her sneakers, her phone charger, a water bottle with a dent in the side, her car keys, her wallet, and a photograph of her niece that she kept taped inside her locker. Harold handed her the bag. I'm sorry, Soren, he said quietly. Don't be, she said. Take care of yourself, Harold. She walked out through the automatic doors into the Virginia night, which was cool and smelled like the ocean, and she stood in the parking lot for a moment before she found her car. She drove home. She sat on her kitchen floor for a while, which was something she did when things were very bad. The floor felt more honest than furniture, somehow more appropriately close to the ground, and she thought about Bex's amber eyes watching her, and about the way Kovacs's exhale had sounded when the vitals stabilized, and she thought, I would do it again. Then she made tea and went to sleep. The next 2 days were quiet in the specific way of aftermath. She called her sister. She called her friend Amara, who was also a nurse and who said, Of course you did, and of course they did. And I'm so angry I could put someone through a wall, which helped more than it probably should have. She did not call a lawyer, though Amara told her she should. She updated her resume. She sat with the unfairness of it the way you had to sit with unfair things, directly, without flinching, until they became simply true instead of impossible. On the 3rd day, she got a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Ashby, said the voice on the other end. Male, measured, the particular cadence of someone accustomed to delivering information without effect. This is Lieutenant Commander Reese, United States Navy. I was hoping you might be available to come to Claremont Regional Medical Center this morning. Soren sat very still. May I ask why, she said. I think it would be better to explain in person, Reese said. Sergeant Kovacs asked me to reach out. He said to tell you that Bex is doing well. She was quiet for a moment. What time, she said. She dressed the way she always dressed. Dark jeans, a clean blouse, comfortable shoes. She was not a person who performed for situations, and she did not perform for this one. She drove to the hospital and parked in the visitor lot, which felt strange. She had parked in staff parking for 3 years, in the same spot, 2nd row, near the light, and she walked in through the main entrance. There were 4 men in the lobby. She recognized Kovacs immediately. He was in dress uniform now, ribbons and rank visible, standing very straight. Beside him was a man she didn't recognize, also in Marine dress uniform, with the kind of rank on his collar that meant people made room for him when he walked into rooms. And 2 others, Navy, one of them the lieutenant commander she assumed was Reese, and another who was older and very quiet and stood slightly apart in a way that made her understand, without being told, that he was the most senior person in the room. They were standing in the lobby of Claremont Regional Medical Center, and the lobby was very, very quiet. Maddox was there too. Soren saw her across the room, standing near the administrative wing entrance, flanked by 2 members of the hospital board. Maddox had the expression of someone who had come to a meeting expecting to be in charge of it, and had just realized she was not. Kovacs saw Soren walk in and cross to her immediately. He looked different in dress uniform. She'd only seen him in the blood-soaked field clothes he'd had on 3 days ago, but his eyes were the same. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said Bex is doing well," Soren said. Something shifted in his face. "Dr. Shields says she'll make a full recovery. She's already trying to stand." A pause. "She's stubborn." "Good," Soren said. "That's good." Reese approached. He was professional and direct, and he spoke without preamble, which she appreciated. "Mrs. Ashby, I'll explain what's happening. Sergeant Kovacs's unit contacted their command when they became aware of your termination. The command contacted ours because of," he paused, selecting words, "the nature of Bex's recent service record. There's a situation that the public record doesn't fully reflect, and which I'm not at liberty to detail entirely, but the short version is this. Bex located and indicated on a device approximately 72 hours ago that, had it detonated, would have caused significant casualties. Her service on that day has implications that go beyond this facility." Soren waited. "We're not here to tell Claremont Regional how to run their hospital," Reese said. "We're here because we believe that what you did for Bex deserves to be on the record, and because there are several people who wanted to be present when that happened." The senior officer, she learned later his name was Admiral Thatcher, though in the moment he did not introduce himself, simply nodded when her eyes found him, stepped forward. He didn't give a speech. She had expected a speech and did not get one, which meant she liked him immediately. He said, "Sergeant Kovacs told me you knew the rules and did it anyway." "Yes, sir," she said. "He told me you didn't hesitate." "She was bleeding," Soren said. Thatcher looked at her for a moment. His face was weathered and precise, the face of someone who had been making very hard decisions for a very long time. He said, "The Navy thanks you, Ms. Ashby." He said it simply. No ceremony, no performance, just the words and what they meant. Soren heard a sound across the room and glanced at Maddox. The administrator had gone the particular white around the edges that came from realizing that the story she'd been telling herself about a situation was not the story the room was telling. Reese said, "Ashby, I've spoken this morning with the hospital's board. I want to be clear that we did not come here to apply pressure." "You didn't have to," said a voice she didn't recognize. She turned. A woman was standing near the board members, 50s, business clothes, the specific posture of institutional authority, though a different kind than Maddox's. She introduced herself as Sandra Beaumont, board chair, and she said it with a directness that suggested she had not enjoyed the last 48 hours. "The board met this morning," Beaumont said. "Administrator Maddox's decision to terminate Ms. Ashby has been reviewed and reversed, effective immediately." She looked at Soren directly. "The board recognizes that the situation 3 nights ago was unusual and that the response, while outside standard protocol, reflected sound emergency judgment and resulted in the preservation of a military working animal with significant active duty service record." She paused. "We would like to offer you reinstatement." Soren was quiet for a moment. She thought about the plastic bag with the dented water bottle. She thought about her name badge sitting in a desk somewhere in HR. She thought about the kitchen floor. She thought about Bex. "What about the protocol review?" she said. Beaumont blinked. "I'm sorry?" "If I come back," Soren said, "I want there to be a protocol review. Military working animals in emergency situations. What's the procedure? Who has authority to make the call? What medications are approved? It should be written down before something like this happens again." She looked at Beaumont steadily. "Because it will happen again, not here maybe, but somewhere. And the next nurse shouldn't have to choose between the patient and their job." Beaumont looked at her. Maddox, across the room, said nothing. "I think that's a reasonable request," Beaumont said, slowly. "Then yes," Soren said, "I'll come back." There was no applause. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that and more real. Kovacs reached over and shook her hand, and his grip was solid and brief, and he said, "Thank you, Ashby," in the tone of someone who had said thank you before but not always been sure it landed, and this time wanted to be sure. She shook his hand. Later, when the lobby had cleared and the military vehicles had pulled out of the visitor lot, and Beaumont had gone back to her office, and Maddox had gone wherever Maddox went. When the room stopped supporting her version of events, Soren stood at the nurse's station on the AR floor and felt the specific strangeness of being back in a place that looked identical to how she'd left it 3 days ago. One of the night nurses, a woman named Terry who had worked the ER for 11 years and claimed to have seen everything, and mostly had, brought her a cup of coffee without being asked and said, "Welcome back," and that was that. Soren took the coffee. She thought about something Amara had said on the phone 2 days ago when Soren was still sitting on her kitchen floor. "The thing about doing the right thing," Amara had said, "is that it doesn't protect you. It just means you can live with yourself afterward." She hadn't been sure that was enough when Amara said it. She thought maybe it was. 3 weeks later, a card arrived at the hospital addressed to her. Inside, there was no signature, just a photograph, Bex, standing on all 4 legs in what looked like a grassy area outside a building, ears up, looking directly at the camera with the particular focused attention of a dog who has been trained for serious work and takes it seriously. Underneath the photograph, someone had written in careful block letters, "She's back on duty. So are you. Thank you." Soren kept the photograph in her locker, in the same spot where her niece's picture had always been. After a while, she stopped thinking of it as a reminder of the worst few days of her career and started thinking of it as something simpler. Proof that the 11 seconds when she didn't step back had mattered. She had counted them. She remembered them still. 11 seconds, and a dog who came home.